Over the past couple of weeks, we've had Reverend Barber on a couple of times, the guy who started the Moral Mondays thing in North Carolina. Ari Berman has done some great reporting on this thing for The Nation, a contributing writer for The Nation magazine, investigative journalism fellow with the Nation Institute, and the author of Herding Donkeys. You can read his writing over at thenation.com. And so let's check in with Ari and find out what somebody who has really been paying attention to this has figured out about it. Ari, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me back.
Sure. So what's going on with Moral Mondays?
Well, it's a really significant development. North Carolina, and I apologize, but I'm outside in Texas at the moment, but North Carolina is really significant because I think it embodies two things. It embodies, number one, the really right-wing takeover of the state legislature there. But number two, it represents the fight back among progressives. And both of them have really been exacerbated in that state. On the one hand, you have an extremely right-wing legislature in a state that's always been pretty moderate, but that has spawned, in turn, a really, really, really energetic, multiracial, multi-issue progressive movement that the state of North Carolina and really the whole South hasn't seen in a very long time.
Well, and this is much of the right-wing growth in North Carolina has been the result of one guy. Isn't his name Art Pope, this billionaire?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Art Pope is sort of like the Koch brother of North Carolina. He's very closely aligned with them, and he has spent a lot of money, over $40 million, in that state developing the conservative movement. He's targeted selective legislative races. He spent $2.2 million on legislative races in 2010, allowed Republicans to flip the legislature for the first time in over 100 years. They did very aggressive gerrymandering to make sure that they would stay in power. Then Art Pope put $500,000 into the governor's race in 2012, which Republicans won, and then Republicans in turn named Pope the top budget official in the state, which was really, really shocking. And they just pushed through a number of extreme policies in the economy. For example, ending the earned income tax credit for $900,000, cutting unemployment benefits for $170,000, basically giving a tax cut to the richest North Carolinians, the Art Popes of the world, while raising taxes on everybody else. And that budget has just been finalized today.
So to summarize this in very simple English, the Republicans, Art Pope, bought enough Republicans into office that they could put him in the budget director's position, and together they could give him a giant tax break.
Yeah, basically. I mean, he's essentially has bought a state, a very important swing state, right. No less.
Has he made back his investment yet? Does anybody know?
I do not know. But Republicans basically were lucky for two reasons. Number one, they were lucky to win the 2010 election and then get the gerrymandering bonus that comes with that to try to stay in power for the next decade. I'm not sure they're going to stay in power for the next decade because their approval rating is at 20%, but it'll be interesting to see to what extent gerrymandering protects them. And then number two, they took advantage of a very demoralized Democratic Party to win the governor's office in 2012. But those dynamics have really changed now. You have a very, very energetic progressive movement down there. They believe they can flip the legislature in 2014. McCrory's numbers, the governor's numbers, are now underwater in that state. And so the conservative policies there are really backfiring.
Mm-hmm. Ari, a kind of technical political question that you may know something about. And this kind of, well, I'll just give you the setup. I was having dinner a couple of weeks ago with an acquaintance who is a former, shall we say, senior official in the Republican Party. And he said that the Republicans actually have a strategy associated with their gerrymandering strategy that they're not talking about out loud, but that is like an open secret within the Republican Party. And that is to take any district that is already largely enough Democratic that it's going to remain Democratic into the foreseeable future, that has a white representative, Democrat elected representative. These are House of Representative districts. And move enough, if possible, when you gerrymander the state, move enough African Americans into that district, or other minorities, principally African Americans, but also Latinos, into that district, that it will no longer be a white face. It will be an African American or Hispanic. And he said the Democrats are afraid to yell about this or point it out because that's like saying, hey, we don't want more elected people of color. On the other hand, he said what the Republican strategy is to make sure that every time somebody sees an elected official with a big D after their name on television or hears them speak, it's a person of color, so that this is the Nixon Southern strategy, Reagan's give his first speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi strategy on steroids. Put a black face on the Democratic Party. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, North Carolina has been a case study for what you're talking about. I wrote a story about this in 2012 called How the GOP is Resegregating the South, and it was about North Carolina, but also other southern states as well. And if you look at what the redistricting maps did, the way Republicans took power is they packed every possible black and Hispanic Democrat into as few districts as possible. They took a state that was pretty politically integrated, pretty racially integrated for the South, and they basically turned it into a situation where everyone who is white is a Republican, or all Republicans are white, and the Democrats are largely black party.
And so what happens is for the
explicit about that strategy, and that strategy has been challenged in court, and the plaintiffs, including the NAACP, have said very clearly that was the goal.
Yeah, so the net effect, this fellow told me, was that the average guy who's just makes a living sharpening chainsaws and shows up at the bar every night, who lives in one of these rural areas or whatever. I mean, even who doesn't pay that much attention to politics but who is white is going to notice that the Republican Party seems to be the party of white people, and the Democratic Party seems to be the party of black people. Period. End of discussion. What color am I? Okay, that's my party.
That's exactly what's happening, and it's really sad, because North Carolina has this history of Jesse Helms and of doing this kind of divisive racial politics, and people hoped when Barack Obama won the state in 2008 and then competed again very strongly in North Carolina in 2012, but those days are over, that we really had moved beyond hitting one set of racial groups against another, but really we see that that's the centerpiece of the GOP strategy. And let me just mention one more thing. North Carolina is now pushing a voter ID bill, which they're likely going to pass this week, that could disenfranchise over 300,000 people. And if you look at who doesn't have state-issued IDs in North Carolina, 34% of them are African American in the state where they're 23% of the electorate. So the voter ID law disproportionately is going to affect minority voters. They've already written the bill so that student IDs are not going to be accepted. So it's going to impact young voters. So they're really going after not only minority voters, but the people that really support those kind of progressive policies as well.
Right. Amazing. So how do you think this is all going to play out, Ari Berman?
Well, I think in the short term, the Moral Monday movement has accomplished what they could, because there weren't enough votes to block any of these policies. So instead, what they've done is they've made it a national issue. They've brought down the legislature's numbers so that 2014 is now in play, and they have also energized progressives in the state. And so I think going forward, number one, it means that the elections are going to be more competitive there. I think it means that it'll be easier to build up progressive capacity to get candidates to run for office, to raise money, to do all those things going forward. And I think it'll also show to people in other states where Republicans have control that even if you don't have the votes in the legislature, there's other ways you can fight these policies. And I think that's going to be very, very important now in a South that in many ways is a post-Voting Rights Act South.
And it's not just the South.
Overturning,
I mean, this fellow I was talking with was from the Midwest. This is happening in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan. Go ahead.
No, absolutely. But what I was going to say is that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act largely pertain to the South.
Right.
So without those legal protections, the kind of organizing that the Moral Monday movement is doing becomes more important than ever.
Absolutely right. Ari Berman, you can read all about it over at thenation.com, North Carolina's Moral Mondays, and check out his book, Herding Donkeys. It's brilliant. Ari, thanks for dropping by.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me.
Great talking with you. Always great talking with you.